Side 4.
Over the years, new characters have been introduced with different relationships to explore. Edie, Thora Hird, and husband Wesley, Gordon Warmby, are probably among the nearest we cartoon characters have come to the ideal marital solution. He almost permanently in his shed clad in dirty overalls, and she in her ever-sparkling kitchen with plenty of newspaper on the floor. It is surprising how coincidence has been responsible for introducing new faces to the Summer Wine team. For instance, Thora Hird happened to mention during an interview on television how much she enjoyed the program. Alan Bell, our director, who happened to be watching, immediately inquired if she would care to make a guest appearance in an episode. She accepted and joined us for a full-length feature, Uncle of the Bride, playing Edie, and she's never left us. This also was the film that introduced Michael Aldridge as Seymour when Brian Wilder's Foggy left to seek his fortunes elsewhere. You will remember Seymour, I'm sure. He was the balm pot inventor that made Heath Robinson appear quite logical. It was June 1984, and we were having a successful season of the stage version of Summer Wine at the end of the pier at Bournemouth. It had already proved itself a great success both on tour and during a previous season at Eastbourne. I must say, this being my first experience of summer season at the seaside, I found it a most enjoyable way to earn a living. At Bournemouth, for various reasons, certain characters had to be replaced, and Peter, Jane Freeman, Jean Ferguson and I were joined by newcomers Juliet Kaplan and Robert Fife. It just so happened that Roy had introduced 3 new characters into the Summer Wine series for that year, which we would be filming on location in August. Owing to pressure of work, he had not yet been able to see the stage version, so imagine our surprise when he and Alan paid us a visit at a matinee soon after the opening. The 3 characters, Marina, Pearl and Howard, were cast that afternoon. By now we were the flavour of the year, continually in the top 10 ratings, and with our Christmas show topping Gone with the Wind. We were wined and dined, the Café Royal, the Ritz, the Dorchester. One tabloid set up a stunt for Compo to have lunch at the Savoy, served in a luxurious suite, arriving by Rolls-Royce and making an entrance through the main foyer, startling an Arab gent and his many wives. I sat on an elephant with the Duke of Gloucester for boys' clubs. Nora Batty became the pin-up at a certain establishment of high learning, and Compo opened summer fetes and Christmas bazaars, even having his photo taken holding bonny babies. It was just like 1948 and the J. Arthur Rank merry-go-round, now the second time around for me. Summer Wine was nominated for a BAFTA British Academy of Film and Television Arts Award. We won the Pie Radio and TV Industry Award, and it was also voted by millions of younger viewers through their television show Swap Shop as being the funniest television programme. When Sidney Lotterby, who has many successful credits in a long career with BBC Comedy, took on the direction and production of Summer Wine, he asked me if I would be interested in helping with a video promotion. This was to be made jointly by ITV and the BBC with the idea of selling British comedy series in America, and Compo, he explained, was the only one required for the Summer Wine spot. I agreed, and Sidney said that ITV would be in touch. ITV were, in due course, and appeared to be very well organised, explaining that they simply wanted a shot of Compo riding around Nelson's column on a bike. This would simply act as an opener to several excerpts from the series and would take no more than half an hour of my time. I was given the date and the time a car would be at my disposal to take me to Trafalgar Square. I gathered from these details that this was going to be no small-time promotion. This was midwinter, and the obvious cheapest way to take such a shot was on Sunday morning, as soon as there was sufficient light, no traffic and no people. But no, they must have wanted plenty of action, because they chose midweek at 5:30, right in the middle of the rush hour. On the appointed day, my costume was promptly delivered by BBC Wardrobe, and at the appointed hour, a very large limousine was waiting to take me to Trafalgar Square. As we arrived, my feelings about this being no small-time promotion were confirmed. Half of Trafalgar Square was illuminated by huge television lights. Hundreds of people were watching or milling about as the traffic became more and more frenzied. The director met me, explaining that all he wanted from me was to cycle towards the camera, which was 100 yards away, and any funnies I could think of would be more than welcome. I remember I said, half-jokingly, "I suppose you've got permission from the police for this?" But he was called away before he could answer. The first shot was okay for the director and myself, but not the cameraman. So we shot it again, and as I got nearer the camera, I became aware of a policeman advancing out of the crowd. As he came towards me, the thought suddenly flashed through my mind, "I bet they haven't got permission to film here, the stupid..." The policeman interrupted, pushed back his helmet and said, "Bill Owen, this is your life." It was Eamon Andrews. It was a wonderful moment with my family and friends. A memorable evening. Sidney Lotterby left Summer Wine in 1981 and was replaced by Alan J. Bell, a remarkable man. Well, he must be, to have survived all these years in spite of us. Of course, he bears scars as proof, but his enthusiasm is never-ending. I had a phone call from him this morning from Yorkshire, where he's charging up and about, uphill and down dale, looking for new film locations. But after 23 years, there surely can't be any. But I would like to make it perfectly clear that you will never hear from me one word against my adopted county. Just about the finest in the world. When Alan took over, a foreigner from the south, as a form of introduction, he kindly invited the three of us to lunch, where I took the opportunity of giving him a friendly warning about the temperament of our occasionally fickle Yorkshire weather, which, like the people, comes generous and varied. For example, we might be up there on the moors waiting for the rain to cease so that we could film at 8 o'clock in the morning. And by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's still bucketing down. So a demented film director, tears in his eyes, yells, "All right, it's a wrap." And everyone scampers back to the hotel to get out of their sodden clothes. But on the way, what happens? The sun comes out and we have a warm, balmy late afternoon and evening. If only we'd waited another 10 minutes, we might have been able to complete the day's schedule. It's the voice of our now hysterical director. If I seem to be adopting a know-all attitude, it's because I happen to be an adopted Yorkshireman, a fellow member of the Yorkshire Society. To my knowledge, the only foreigner to receive such an honour, and have therefore become well acquainted with our folklore. You've never heard of the Pixie Tykes, or the old Ridings adage? Make magic on the moor, and they'll be wet, then pour. What's filmmaking but magic and luck? My lips are sealed. I've said enough. One of the finest summers we had enjoyed for a decade occurred in 1982, Alan's first year with us. Every day the sun simply shone and shone. We were ahead of schedule, and he was able to indulge himself in some fancy camera work. Occasionally I caught his glance, and with it a wry smile that seemed to say, "Okay, where's this weather then?" The year 1982 may have been his introduction, but 83 was his baptism. The rain fell by the bucket, non-stop. Well, that was until filming had been wrapped for the day, and the unit disappeared. Then came the sun. 'Tis said that during one of these rainy days, a film director was seen paddling across Carpworth Moor in a bathing costume, raging at the sky, with 2 fingers outstretched. As my association with Holmfirth, now christened the summer wine town, has grown, I have purposefully gone out of my way to become involved with the community whenever asked. Probably for the first time in my life, I have wanted to belong. Saturday is our one day off when on film location, but not for me, I'm proud to say. I haven't had a free Saturday in years. There's always something going on somewhere in the valley at which my presence is required. I won't attempt to list all the organisations and activities to which my name is linked in that part of the West Riding, for fear I should leave someone out. But I will mention the Saturday I marched with Neil Kinnock in a Yorkshire miners' gala, and then was driven hell for leather back to Holmfirth to present prizes to the local Air Training Corps, of which I'm president. Sometimes a Jonah will ask, do they appreciate it? Ah, that's the question. Or is it? Several years ago, I was leading our torchlight procession through the valley when my eye caught a banner which read, Bill Owen for Mayor. A joke. But I liked it. The discovering of Holmfirth had begun with its inclusion in the official Yorkshire guidebook. Coachloads of fans were beginning to arrive, wandering around looking for the landmarks they had seen on television. At that time, once they had found Nora Batty's house and compost flat next door, then taken a walk to the church precinct for Sid's Cafe, that was about it. Of course, if they were willing to risk the nooks and crannies, alleys and byways, they might eventually find Clegg's front door, if lucky. There are only 4 cottages, not one of them numbered. But great fish and chips are to be had at Compost Caff. Whilst the structure and fabric of the town centre have remained unchanged down the century, since summer wine I have watched it slowly come alive again, picking itself up by the bootstraps and accepting the fact that it is famous and there's nothing anyone can do about it, only take advantage of it. Now Holmfirth boasts a new library, a first-class hotel, shops galore to satisfy every need, and restaurants, pubs and bistros to satisfy every taste. Bamford's famous picture postcard museum has an historic range, including those of the saucy seaside variety, which I can remember as a small boy, totally innocent of their innuendo, of course. Then there is the official summer wine exhibition with its extensive picture gallery and amazing array of original artifacts constructed expressly for the series, with mementos for the visitors. Through the busy, buzzing little town runs the River Holm, not wide, deep or rapid, but it's ours, with its sanctuaries of leafy glades, flowered walks and bankside picnic places, for which we must thank the Holmfirth Community Trust, a worthy team of volunteers who are concerned with the appearance and welcoming aspect of the town. There is a body of opinion, of course, that would wish us elsewhere, and their feelings have been expressed to me personally and to our director in no uncertain terms. Do they really wish to return to those days when we first arrived, when the river was a mess and changed colour according to what material was being dyed up at the mill at the end of Hollowgate? Speaking of Hollowgate reminds me of one of my first encounters of an unforgettable kind when filming on the day of our arrival. I was passing a Chinese takeaway where, standing at the door, was the owner and his little son. I dare say neither of them had ever seen a film crew before, and showing off, I spoke as a tyke to the tiny boy. "Hey up, lad, how's the doing?" The result was electric. The boy screamed and clung to his father's trouser leg. Then they both hastily disappeared, slamming the shop door behind them, the father cursing me in what must have been his native tongue. I couldn't be sure. Chinese translators are thin on the ground in Holmfirth. I have often been asked about Compo's personal safety. Have there ever been any accidents over the years with risks he so often takes? Now, whenever there's danger to life and limb, a stuntman takes the risk. But let's face it, Compo will always be at risk. He will never behave physically or mentally like an old man. Why, when walking on the pavement, does he walk with one foot in the gutter? Why does he, when walking the country lanes, choose the tops of dry stone walls? Why is he always the dupe of Foggy's crazy aspirations and ideas for furthering their financial and social status? For example, careering downhill on a pair of scooters, Yorkshire remains, finding himself in deep water, wellies to wetsuit. And there was that really dangerous caper when he wore a pair of large wings in an attempt to fly, using the roof of a 30-foot-high barn as a launching pad, in a gale. And he might have succeeded if it hadn't have been for 3 pairs of strong hands off camera hanging onto his feet. I forget the title. I wish I could forget the episode. The Deepwater incident involved Peter Sallis, Michael Bates and myself. We were filming on the river in a canoe. Fortunately, we were wearing old-fashioned swimming costumes, but I, like a fool, had kept my wellies on. Canoes are a tricky craft to handle, and in the hands of inexperienced amateurs such as ourselves, the inevitable happened. It turned over. As might be expected, my wellies filled with water and I sank to the bottom. I managed to kick them off, but on the way to the surface passed Peter, who was on his way down, a non-swimmer. Somehow I managed to get us both to the surface, and as I looked around it seemed as if the entire film unit had jumped in to rescue us. Peter was taken off my hands at once. Then a young man, one of the dressers, I later found out, kept insisting on trying to rescue me until I finally had to tell him to piss off, explaining I was more than capable of saving myself. Later, I realized I had been more than ungrateful and exceedingly rude. I apologized, but he was very uptight with me for the rest of the week. The longing for Nora Batty is just a fantasy, as was proved when Compo was offered the opportunity of bed when he advertised for a housekeeper. There she was, willing and waiting, and what did he do? Blew "Come to the cookhouse door, boys" on a trumpet. How bizarre can you get? The secret of Compo is that his life is still controlled by impulse. Each day is lived on the spur of the moment. He has never really grown up. At heart, he is still a little boy. Me granny were working at mill when she were 8 years old. She told us herself when I were a kid. Everybody had to work at mill in them days. If they didn't, they starved or went poaching. That were all right if they didn't get caught. But if one of them keepers caught they bore the scars to their dying day. Story goes, me granny were jumped by foreman one time when she had to bring samples to his office like. She were only 16, and there she were, with one in the oven. She was sacked from mill, and her father threw her out. So she went housekeeping for 2 of her cousins, them what had the small farm up here. Up here happened to be Cartworth Moor, 19th of June 1992. The date of this conversation, which was the 21st anniversary of our first arrival in Holmfirth for the filming of the pilot of Last of the Summer Wine. It was a beautiful day, and I had decided on a lunchtime picnic, alone. I wanted to think about this momentous happening in my life, and that was when he joined me. So, in the warm haze of that glorious location, no doubt aided by a couple of glasses of ice-cold Chablis, we talked for the first and only time. I asked him if the 2 cousins accepted the fact that his granny was pregnant. Oh, aye. They would probably never noticed. They certainly wouldn't have bothered. After all, she was sharing both their beds. Your granny must have been a glutton for punishment, I said. No, that went with the job of housekeeper in them days. And she had a job for life as long as she behaved herself. And did she, I inquired? Aye. She saw both of them to the grave and inherited the farm, such as it were. But me mam was safe and grew up with a roof over her head. Well, that were till she met me dad. I asked him what his father was by trade. A tinker, when he weren't in Nick. Pressing the subject, I asked how often that was. More often than when he were at home, he replied, then continued, he had a real liking for lead from church roofs. But if he came home drunk, me man would belt him, then put him a bed, and I'd not hear another squeak out of him until opening time. Me mam, oh, she were tough as old boots. She had to be, rearing a brood of 7 lasses of me. I were her favourite. She'd take me on cart when we went round selling clothes pegs or collecting scrap. I loved me mam. It was only Alice and me that went to school like. I halted this flow of reminiscences with the offer of some chablis, which he drank in one gulp, followed by the remark, "Nat's piss." Ignoring the insult, I asked him about the village school. He nodded. It served several villages, but they had to have boots. Cleggie's father were house painter. But it were Foggy that had come to school as clean as a new pin. He had a crease, can they believe it, in his short trousers. But when it come to going home, we used to fill his trousers full of beetles. I'm often asked to explain the secret of summer wine's success, but there's no short answer to that one. How does an unsophisticated television comedy with plots and characters invariably over the top regularly hold a place in the top 10 ratings? With viewing figures of 11 million, young and old continue indefatigably towards not just being an institution, but a cult, and one which the BBC have, unsurprisingly maybe, never given any indication of withdrawing. Just what are the ingredients required to have children write and asking me if I can have a word with their parents about allowing them to stay up late to see the show? Or the grandparents who told me their grandson had been in a coma for months, and as Summer Wine was his favourite programme, would I, as compo, make a tape they could play at his bedside to see if it would help him back to consciousness. Some months later they wrote to tell me he had in fact done so. And then there was the lady from New Zealand, where apparently the series is very popular, who stopped me in Holmfirth, where she was spending her holiday in Summer Wine Town, and asked if I would send a signed photograph of Compo to her friend back home who had cancer. So a photograph of this outrageous little clown, dressed like a scarecrow and grinning like a garden gnome, was duly dispatched to Mrs. Gubb in Auckland, New Zealand. I did hear from her, and I hope she won't mind if I quote part of her letter. Not once since the diagnosis have I shed a tear, but when I opened your envelope, the tears ran down my face. It was so very kind of you to take the time to comfort me in such a way. Throughout the letter, she refers to me as my Compo. The humour in Summer Wine is in the tradition of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. It has neither pretension nor embarrassment, and regardless of plausibility, maintains an integrity. Combine these values with a cast of excellent players, mix and stir well into an incomparable beauty of the West Riding, and you've got a real good summer pudding, or as in our case, a great summer wine that travels. Loath to tear myself away from the subject of that glorious countryside, I have to mention one spot in particular, a favourite of mine and our director Alan Bell's. It's called Intake Lane, and it eventually saunters to a crossroads that then seems to give up the ghost. I suppose because it's so high up, there's really nowhere else to go. Standing there on a warm summer's day, waiting for the others to arrive, eardrums bursting with the silence, I'm faced with a panorama that never ceases to arouse in me the wonder of this planet, despite our greed and determination to destroy it. I have a theory that I can only describe as evolutionary concerning the changing attitude to old age, and it takes me back to a train journey to Yorkshire and the ticket collector who would not be collecting for much longer and was looking forward to waking his spouse with the question, "Right, gal, what shall we do today?" Nothing about retiring, lazing in rocking chairs, or resigning oneself to the inevitable, but today's a fresh start. A new adventure. That is, of course, if one has a realistic pension. The whole concept of aging has changed. Now we are living longer. In fact, I've read that in the not-too-distant future, the senior citizens of this world will exceed the rest of the population. Going back over 20 years to the pilot script of Summer Wine, it is basically the story of 3 senior citizens faced with the challenge of living for the day, simply getting on with life. Now, whether the author was consciously preempting these changing attitudes, I don't know. But nevertheless, I am of the opinion that it was the unique spirit and bravura of these geriatric Just Williams coming at such a time which gave its own longevity and made it totally acceptable. I said there was no short answer, but it is my own. I've done my best to analyze the relationships between the other characters in Summer Wine, that is, with the exception of Eli. And who would dare attempt an analysis of Eli, particularly when he's down at the White Horse ready to play darts? The recurrent and I suppose inevitable question I'm asked is regarding our personal relationships, Brian Wilde, Peter Sallis and Bill Owen, the actors. There are still busybodies who quite casually ask how we get along after all these years, hoping, of course, to see me tear my hair out and reply, "We hate the bloody sight of each other." So they're usually abashed when I reply just casually, "Oh, we get along." This can be a red rag to the really persistent ones who then say, "Oh, come on, you're not going to tell me you don't have rows or disagreements, that there's no jealousy?" Nonchalantly, I murmur, "Very rarely." But if they continue to persist, I confront them eyeball to eyeball with, "Have you ever heard of Duke Ellington?" Stepping back, they give a puzzled nod, and I relate the story of the great maestro being asked, "How have you managed to keep a band of such talented musicians together for nearly 40 years? He simply replied, "Money." An oversimplification, of course, and it doesn't quite fit the bill as far as I'm concerned. For me, Summer Wine has become a way of life, and one I find difficult to contemplate being without. But money does come into it, an important factor for the 3 of us, particularly over the last 10 years or so, and it would be hypocritical to pretend otherwise. Before leaving the personal relationship issue, I'd like to say that Peter's and mine has been the most consistent since the series began, and during that time we, as characters, have had to adjust and readjust to the changes fresh characters have brought about as they have come and gone. I would claim that as actors we have brought the relationship between our 2 characters to a fine art. Our timing and reaction during one of those now rare moments when we are alone together is still a joy to me. But beyond shared love of classical music, about which Peter has enlightened me and broadened my knowledge, I think we have very little in common. Even less, I feel, with Brian Wilde, whom I've always found to be an extremely private person. In fact, I believe my whole concept of living is different from theirs. For instance, and I speak from experience, the subject of politics is taboo. Not from any strong opposing views on their part, but simply because they appear to be apolitical. Plus the fact that they just cannot understand how I can possibly, on my day off, get involved with the local community of Holmfirth. We have a caravan the size of a self-contained flat in which we have each reserved a corner to enjoy our own privacy, which is strictly observed. We rarely communicate between series, meeting the following year for the first time at a script conference prior to going on location. But like I said, we get along. I am reminded by a photograph of myself with the Mayor of Camden unveiling a plaque to Unity Theatre on the 1st of April 1992, which marked the dates of its beginning and its end. The end came in the early hours on the 5th of November 1975, when Unity Theatre was destroyed by fire. The only habitable part of the building that remained was a room over what was left of the coffee bar. There were various rumours as to the culprits, the local National Front, vandals, and even children, which seems highly unlikely at 4 o'clock in the morning. On that day, I was at the annual general meeting of our union, Actors' Equity, completely unaware of what had happened until the president, Hugh Manning, announced prior to the beginning of the meeting that Unity Theatre had been destroyed by fire in the early hours of the morning. I sat stunned. Although the theatre had by then become barely a shadow of its former self, I had had little or no association with it for many years. Nevertheless, it was a shock. A year or so later, I was asked to attend a concert given on behalf of the new Unity Theatre Building Fund. Reluctantly, I agreed, but asking myself, why bother? Was this going to be just a trip down memory lane? If so, where were the beliefs? Where was the commitment? Enthusiasm such as ours was born of a bygone age and could never be recaptured. However, in spite of my protestations when Alfie Bass, actor and lifelong member of the theatre, asked me to become a member of Unity Theatre Trust, I agreed. I must admit to being somewhat surprised and apprehensive when I received notice of my first trust meeting and discovered it was to be held in the one habitable room attached to the burnt-out building. It was very strange in the evening half-light, walking up the path to the theatre forecourt after all these years, and then, suddenly, there it was, just as I'd always remembered it, the front of the building almost untouched. But the truth was yet to come. When the meeting was over, someone suggested that I might care to see what was left of the theatre. Given the courage, I should have refused. What morbid interest was there for me in the 4 blackened walls with only the night sky for a roof, except 1,000 haunting memories? Before slipping the photograph of the unveiling back into its cover, let me explain that the occasion was also part of the opening ceremony of Unity Court, so named in further homage to the theatre. It consists of several private dwellings and accommodation for the elderly and families in need. It was a very emotional time for those of us who remembered the glorious years when that little converted chapel became a shrine to the radical awakening of so many of its innocent congregation. Now, truly phoenix-like, it has risen from its ashes to become a permanent, living memory. It was late summer in 1988 when I had a call from Lindsay Anderson, which was most unusual, for as a rule we kept in touch by sending picture postcards when we were away from home. His coming from as far away as Moscow, mine rarely further than the Isle of Wight. He told me that David Storey had written a new play called The March on Russia, which he, Lindsay, would direct. It was to be presented at the National Theatre, and I would be sent a copy of the script to consider the part of a character called Passmore. The play concerns the gathering of the Passmore family, 2 daughters and a son, played respectively by Rosemary Martin, Patsy Rowlands, and Frank Grimes, to celebrate the birthday of their mother, played by Constance Chapman. Once again, skeletons emerge from the cupboard, including the relationship between old Tommy Passmore and his wife after 60 years of marriage. It has all the ingredients for a family tragedy. But because of David's skill as a writer, it is also an extremely funny play for a great deal of the time. The scenes between Mr. and Mrs. Passmore, whose only means of communication after a lifetime's relationship is through badinage and insult, becomes quite hilarious at times. I was being offered the prize of a lifetime when it's normally too late to look for prizes. This was the greatest part I have ever been offered, with the chance to prove I could still do it after all these years. We opened at the Littleton Theatre on Friday, 7th of April 1989, to great acclaim and some of the best notices I have ever received. I have them before me, all stuck in the album, which remains open, just in case, for further offers. But if they are slow in coming, or even if they don't come at all, I shall come up here to my little eyrie, and although strictly it shouldn't be done, I'll read them once again, just to remind myself I can still do it. In late October 1993, the coming of age of Last of the Summer Wine was duly celebrated by an excellent press. 4 important national newspapers, each contributing half a page spread. Insignificant as they may be amidst all the shameful events in this world today, I want to record them for posterity. It's always sunny, even when they're all wrapped up against the wind. Nobody gets hurt when they fall, or nobody dies. It's about an old age that never ages. No wonder we love it so. Stephen Gilbert wrote in The Independent. Andrew Preston of the Daily Express, a vintage comedy brew 20 years on, already longest running situation comedy in the world, can Last of the Summer Wine keep going for another 21 years? Compo replies, I wouldn't count on it, but Roy Clark may have to write us into bath chairs soon. And in the Times, Roy Hattersley wrote, when the broadcast ends with the 3 sprites, Compo, Clegg and Foggy, looking across the limestone landscape of Yorkshire, recall that you are supposed to sigh for the lost innocence they represent and enjoy one of the funniest series ever to appear on television. Whilst in The Observer, Andy Midhurst wrote, Last of the Summer Wine is time warp television, a pictorial nostalgia fantasy with an almost bravura disdain for the complications of contemporary life. It can keep running forever because it was never set in the present in the first place. Perfectly scheduled after songs of praise, Last of the Summer Wine offers a 30-minute haven of very English repudiation of the here and now with a frighteningly well-proved emotional pull. If John Major wants to get the country back to basics, then the party political broadcast has already been made and it goes out this evening at 7 o'clock. Already booked for a further series, I have reached my 80s and perfect strangers will still continue to nod and smile whether I'm in Brighton or Badley Salterton. But I'll be looking forward to getting back to Yorkshire because it's my home, you see. I know I'll be welcomed off the train by friends and staff alike at Wakefield. Eric will be waiting with the car to take me to my delightful bungalow where Ruby and Harry wait to tend my every need. Still in the spotlight after 57 years when I first became an entertainer at Dovercourt Holiday Camp. Someone up there must be looking after me. By way of an epilogue, I have chosen a poem written to celebrate my 70th birthday. It's written by a fine writer and poet and a good friend of mine. We shared a similar childhood background, and for me, the poem turns back those faded photograph years. W4 is the postal code for Acton Green, where I was born. W4. And though the voices are stilled and nothing moves that fetched you running, Bill, the houses remain. Solid Victorian homes reflecting all the values that made you. But the Sprauncy lads, West End styled, all dolled up and nowhere to go, have gone at last, unless you watch at some dim hour for a stubborn shade slipped across Chiswick Common in vain pursuit of a time-forgotten girl, now a granny, vaguely remembered by you from the Hammersmith Ballet. The iron gate at number 3 still groans from ailing hinges, but no mother stands, arms folded, waiting for the deciding marble to be tossed. "Just 5 more minutes, Mum," and argues over until it's as late as 7. But not yet time for Dad to appear. And he won't. For we are all his age, Bill, our roles reversed. But I know you feel the alternate blinding brightness and flickering shadows of the paling fence, warm wooded from a low summer sun as you walk home, your actor's senses alert for just one cry, one shout from a mate, appeared suddenly. Harry Lovelock, March, 1983.
That was Bill Owen reading Summer Wine and Vintage Years, produced by Clive Stanhope for Polygram's Speaking Volumes.